The doctors told her parents the news when she was just 18 months old. Their daughter couldn't hear. Not completely deaf, but close enough that the world would always sound like she was underwater, like everything was happening behind a thick wall. Her parents held each other in that cold hospital room and cried. They were simple people living in a small town in Oregon. Her father worked at a lumber mill. Her mother cleaned houses for wealthy families on the other side of town. They didn't have money for specialists or fancy hearing aids or the kind of help their daughter would need, but they loved her. They loved her more than anything in the world, and they promised each other that night that they would find a way to give her a good life. Growing up, she learned to read lips before she learned to read books. She watched people's mouths move and figured out what they were saying. She paid attention to facial expressions, to body language, to all the little things that hearing people never notice because they don't have to. By the time she started school, she had become an expert at pretending everything was fine. She smiled when other kids smiled. She laughed when they laughed, even if she didn't know what the joke was. She learned to survive in a world that wasn't built for her, but she was lonely. The other children didn't know how to talk to her. They would say something, and when she didn't respond right away, they would just walk off. Some of them made fun of the way she talked, because her words came out different. She couldn't hear herself speak, so she didn't know how to make sounds the way everyone else did. Teachers tried to help, but they had 30 other students to worry about. She fell through the cracks, invisible and silent. The one thing she loved was watching. She would sit by the window during recess and watch the world move. Birds flying, leaves falling, cars passing on the distant road. She noticed patterns that other kids missed. The way clouds moved before a storm. The way her teacher's shoulders would tense up before she got angry. The way the janitor always whistled the same song every morning. Even though she couldn't hear it, she could see his lips forming the same shapes, his body swaying the same way. Everything in the world had a rhythm. She couldn't hear it, but somehow, she could feel it. The day everything changed started with a thunderstorm. She was 7 years old, and the rain was coming down so hard that recess got canceled. All the kids were sent to different classrooms to wait it out. She ended up in the music room, a place she had never been before. It was at the end of a long hallway, and the teacher who was supposed to watch the students got distracted talking to another adult. So she wandered. The music room was small and cluttered. There were posters on the walls showing different instruments, shelves filled with tambourines and recorders and things she didn't have names for. But in the corner, there was a piano. It was old and scratched up, with yellow keys that looked like they had been played 1,000 times. She walked over to it, slowly, like she was approaching a sleeping animal. She put her hand on the wooden surface, and that's when the thunder struck. The whole room shook. The vibration traveled through the floor, up through her legs, into her chest. And she felt the piano shake too. It was like the instrument was alive, responding to the storm outside. She had never felt anything like it before. Without thinking, she sat down on the bench and placed both hands flat against the wood. Another roll of thunder. The piano hummed beneath her palms. She pressed a key, the lowest one she could reach, all the way on the left side. She couldn't hear the note, but she felt it. It traveled through her fingertips, up her arms, into her body. It was deep and warm and powerful. She pressed another key, higher this time. This one felt different, lighter, sharper. She pressed both at the same time and felt them mix together inside her chest. For the next hour, she sat there pressing keys, feeling the vibrations, learning what each one did. She discovered that if she pressed the pedal at the bottom, the sounds lasted longer and blended into each other. She figured out that the black keys felt different from the white ones. She wasn't making music. She didn't know how, but she was discovering something that would change her life forever. The music teacher found her there after the storm passed. Her name was Mrs. Patterson, and she was a patient woman in her 50s who had been teaching music at that school for over 20 years. She watched the little girl sitting at the piano, eyes closed, hands moving across the keys with complete concentration. When she finally spoke, the girl jumped in surprise. She hadn't heard her come in. Mrs. Patterson knelt down, so they were at the same level. She spoke slowly and clearly, so the girl could read her lips. "Do you like the piano?" The girl nodded. Then, in her uneven voice, she asked the question that would set everything in motion. "Can you teach me how to play?" Sin. Mrs. Patterson hesitated. She had taught hundreds of students over the years, but never a deaf child. How could someone learn music if they couldn't hear it? Music was sound. It was notes and melodies and harmonies. It was everything this little girl couldn't access. Teaching her seemed impossible. It seemed cruel, even. Why set a child up for failure? But there was something in the girl's eyes. A spark. A hunger. Mrs. Patterson had seen that look before, in the students who went on to become real musicians. It was rare, but unmistakable. This child wanted to play more than anything in the world. "I don't know if I can," Mrs. Patterson said honestly, "but I'm willing to try." The lessons started the following week. They met every Tuesday and Thursday after school in the music room. Mrs. Patterson had no idea what she was doing. There was no guidebook for teaching piano to a deaf child, so they figured it out together. The girl would place her hands on the piano and feel the vibrations while Mrs. Patterson played. She learned to associate different feelings with different notes. Low notes were heavy and rumbling. High notes were light and quick. She memorized the keyboard by touch, counting the keys, learning exactly where each one was without looking. Word spread through the school. At first, people were curious. Then, they became skeptical. Parents talked at pickup time, wondering why the music teacher was wasting her time on a deaf girl who could never really play. Some of the kids started making jokes. They would pretend to play invisible pianos when she walked by, laughing at their own cleverness. One boy told her that she was stupid for trying to do something impossible. She went home that day and cried into her pillow. Her mother found her there and held her tight. "What happened?" she asked, stroking her daughter's hair. The girl told her everything. About the lessons, about the other kids, about feeling stupid and broken and wrong. Her mother pulled back and looked her straight in the eyes. She spoke slowly, making sure every word was clear. "You are not broken. You hear things differently than other people. That doesn't make you less. It makes you special. And those kids who laugh at you, they don't understand what you're capable of. But one day, you're going to show them. One day, you're going to show everyone." The next morning, the girl walked back into school with her head held high. She went to the music room after classes ended and sat down at the old piano. She placed her hands on the keys, felt the familiar smoothness beneath her fingertips, and began to practice. She didn't know it yet, but she had just taken the first step on a journey that would prove everyone wrong. The lessons with Mrs. Patterson became the highlight of her week. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she would rush to the music room after the final bell, her heart beating fast with excitement. The old piano was waiting for her like a friend. She would sit on the bench, place her hands on the keys, and for the next hour, the rest of the world disappeared. Mrs. Patterson had never taught a deaf student before. There was no manual for this, no guidebook to follow. So they invented their own way of learning. Instead of talking about how notes sounded, they talked about how they felt. Low notes were described as heavy and warm, like a blanket wrapping around you. High notes were light and sharp, like raindrops on a window. Middle notes fell somewhere in between, comfortable and familiar. She learned to use her whole body as an instrument of listening. She would take off her shoes and press her bare feet against the floor to feel the deepest bass notes. She placed her hands flat on the piano's wooden surface to catch vibrations that traveled through the instrument. Sometimes, she would rest her cheek against the side of the piano, feeling the music hum against her skin. It was slow work. Things that took other students a few days to learn took her weeks. Simple melodies required hours of practice. But she never complained. She never gave up. Every small victory felt like climbing a mountain. Mrs. Patterson started staying late after their official lessons ended. She researched famous musicians who had faced similar challenges. One evening, she told her about a man named Beethoven, one of the greatest composers in history. He had started losing his hearing in his 20s and was almost completely deaf by the time he wrote some of his most famous works. He would bite down on a metal rod connected to his piano so he could feel the vibrations through his skull. She listened to this story with wide eyes. Beethoven. A name even she recognized. And he had been deaf too. He had found a way to make music without hearing it. If he could do it, maybe she could too. Mrs. Patterson also told her about a woman from Scotland who became a world-famous percussionist despite being profoundly deaf. She performed barefoot so she could feel the music through the floor. She once said that hearing was basically a specialized form of touch, and that deaf people could experience music just as deeply as anyone else. They just experienced it differently. These stories became her fuel. She kept them close to her heart like precious stones. Whenever doubt crept in, whenever the challenge felt too big, she reminded herself that others had walked this path before her. She wasn't alone. But the world outside the music room wasn't so kind. Middle school brought new challenges. The other students were older now. Meaner. They had discovered the power of cruelty, and she became an easy target. The girl who couldn't hear. The girl who talked funny. The girl who thought she could play piano even though everyone knew it was impossible. One afternoon, a group of kids followed her to the music room. She didn't notice them at first. She was too focused on her practice. Her eyes closed, her fingers moving across the keys. She was working on a simple melody, playing it over and over until it felt right. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw them standing in the doorway. 5 or 6 kids, all laughing. One of them was holding a phone, recording her. She stopped playing immediately. Her face burned with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and never be seen again. The video went up online that same night. Someone added captions making fun of her. They called her names. They said she was pretending to play, that the whole thing was a joke. The video spread through the school like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone had seen it. Walking through the hallways became torture. Kids would make exaggerated hand movements when she passed by, pretending to play invisible pianos. They would mouth words at her, laughing when she couldn't understand. Some of them would clap sarcastically whenever they saw her, applauding her performance. She stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria. She found a quiet corner in the library where she could be alone. She dreaded going to school every morning and counted the minutes until she could go home. The worst part was the shame. She had worked so hard, and now everyone was laughing at her. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was fooling herself. Maybe a deaf girl had no business trying to play music. Maybe she should just give up and accept her place in the world. One night, she came home and went straight to her room. She didn't eat dinner. She didn't do her homework. She just lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling empty inside. When her mother came to check on her, she found her daughter curled up in a ball, tears streaming down her face. Her mother sat beside her and gently rubbed her back. She didn't say anything at first. She just let her cry. Sometimes, that's what people need most. Not words, just presence. Finally, when the tears slowed down, her mother asked what happened. And she told her everything. The video, the laughing, the cruel comments, the feeling that she would never be good enough, that she was stupid for ever trying. Her mother listened without interrupting. When she finished, her mother took her hand and held it tight. "Do you love playing piano?" she asked. She nodded. Despite everything, she still loved it. When she was at that piano, feeling the vibrations move through her body, she felt alive in a way she never felt anywhere else. "Then that's all that matters," her mother said. "Those kids who laugh at you, They don't understand what you're doing. They've never had to fight for something the way you have. They've never had to work twice as hard just to do what comes easy to everyone else. That's not their fault. But it's not your problem either." She looked up at her mother, wanting to believe her but still feeling broken inside. "You don't play for them," her mother continued. "You don't play for their approval or their applause. You play for yourself. You play because it makes you happy. You play because there's music inside you that needs to come out. And one day, when you're ready, you'll play for the people who actually deserve to hear it. The people whose hearts are open. The people who will listen with more than just their ears." She wiped her tears and took a shaky breath. Her mother made it sound so simple. But it wasn't simple. It was hard. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. "What if I'm not good enough?" she whispered. Her mother smiled and touched her cheek. "You're already good enough. You've been good enough since the day you were born. The only person who needs to believe that is you." The next morning, she woke up early. She washed her face, got dressed, and went downstairs. Her mother was surprised to see her ready so early. "I'm going to school," she said. "And after school, I'm going to practice." Her mother hugged her tight. No more words were needed. She walked into school that day with her head held high. The whispers followed her through the hallways. The mocking glances came from every direction. But she didn't look away. She didn't hide. She walked straight to her classes, did her work, and when the final bell rang, she went to the music room. Mrs. Patterson was waiting for her. The older woman didn't mention the video. She didn't offer pity or false comfort. She just gestured toward the piano and said, "Ready to work?" She sat down on the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be more tears, more setbacks, more people who doubted her. But in that moment, sitting at that old piano with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, she made a promise to herself. She would never stop playing. No matter what anyone said, no matter how hard it got, this was her dream, and no one was going to take it from her. By the time she reached high school, she had become technically skilled at the piano. Her fingers moved across the keys with precision. She could play complicated pieces without making mistakes. She had memorized dozens of classical compositions and could perform them from beginning to end without looking at sheet music. On paper, she was an accomplished pianist, but something was missing, and deep down, she knew it. Her playing was correct. Every note was in the right place. Every rhythm was accurate. But when she watched recordings of herself, she could see what others must have seen. There was no life in it, no soul. She played like a machine, hitting the right buttons at the right time. The music came out clean and precise, but it didn't make people feel anything. She didn't know how to fix it. She had worked so hard just to get this far. Learning to play without hearing had taken everything she had. She thought that if she could just master the technical side, the emotional part would follow. But it hadn't, and she was starting to wonder if it ever would. The truth hit her hard during her junior year. A professor from a music college in Portland came to visit her school. He was giving a workshop for students interested in pursuing music seriously. Her teacher recommended her, saying she was one of the most dedicated students she had ever taught. The professor agreed to listen to her play. She performed a piece she had practiced for months. A complicated sonata that required speed and accuracy and perfect timing. When she finished, she looked up at the professor, hoping to see approval on his face. Instead, he looked disappointed. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that cut her deeper than any insult ever had. "You play like you're solving a math problem. Every note is correct, but there's no feeling. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about making people feel something. Right now, your playing feels empty." She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him how hard she had worked, how many obstacles she had overcome, how much she had sacrificed. But she couldn't speak. Her throat was tight. and her eyes were burning with tears she refused to let fall. The professor softened a little. "You have talent," he said. "And clearly, you've worked very hard. But if you want to be a real musician, you need to find the heart behind the notes. Otherwise, you're just pressing keys." She went home that night and didn't touch the piano for 3 days. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over in her mind. Empty. No feeling. Just pressing keys. Was that really all she was doing? After everything she had been through, was she still not good enough? Her mother noticed something was wrong but didn't push. She just left small gestures of love. A cup of hot chocolate on her nightstand. A gentle hand on her shoulder as she passed by. She knew her daughter needed time to work through whatever was hurting her. On the 4th day, she finally got out of bed and sat at the piano. But instead of playing something she had memorized, she just sat there. She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes. She thought about what the professor had said. Find the heart behind the notes. She started going to concerts. Not to listen, because she couldn't hear them the way others did, but to watch. She sat in the back rows and studied the audiences. She watched their faces during different parts of the performance. She noticed when people closed their eyes, when they leaned forward, when they wiped tears from their cheeks, when they smiled without realizing it. She started to understand that music wasn't just about the notes. It was about the spaces between the notes. It was about tension and release. It was about telling a story without words. The best musicians weren't just playing songs. They were sharing pieces of themselves. She went back to the piano with new eyes. She stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be honest. She thought about her own life, the loneliness she had felt as a child, the frustration of living in a world that wasn't built for her, the joy she felt when her fingers first touched those keys during that thunderstorm so many years ago. She tried to put those feelings into her playing. Slowly, something began to change. Then the accident happened. It was a rainy evening in November. Her mother was driving her home from a late practice session. The roads were slick, and visibility was poor. A truck ran a red light and slammed into the passenger side of their car. She woke up in the hospital 2 days later. Her mother was sitting beside her bed, face pale and exhausted but alive. They had both survived. But as the doctors explained her injuries, her heart sank lower and lower. Her left wrist was shattered. They had done surgery to repair it, but there was significant damage to the tendons and nerves. The doctors were honest with her. She might regain most of her mobility, but it would take months of physical therapy. And even then, there were no guarantees. She might never have the same control in her left hand again. For a pianist, it was the worst news possible. The first few weeks were a blur of pain and medication and physical therapy sessions that left her exhausted. She couldn't move her fingers properly. Simple tasks like holding a fork or brushing her teeth became major challenges. Playing the piano was out of the question. She fell into a dark place. All those years of work, all those hours of practice, all those dreams she had been building toward. Gone. Taken away in a single moment by a stranger who ran a red light. She stopped talking to her friends. She stopped caring about school. She just lay in her room, staring at the piano she couldn't play, feeling like a part of her had died in that crash. Her mother tried everything to pull her out of it. She brought her favorite foods. She rented movies they could watch together. She sat with her in silence when words weren't enough, but nothing seemed to help. Her daughter was disappearing into herself, and she didn't know how to bring her back. One night, about 2 months after the accident, she was lying in bed, unable to sleep. Her mind was racing with dark thoughts. What was the point of anything if she couldn't play? Who was she without music? She had built her entire identity around the piano, and now it was gone. But then something strange happened. A melody started playing in her head. Not something she had learned from a book or heard in a video. Something new. something that came from deep inside her. It was sad and slow and full of all the pain she had been carrying since the accident. She got out of bed and found a notebook. With her right hand, she started writing down the notes. It was slow and clumsy. She had never composed music before. She had only ever played what other people had written. But the melody kept coming, and she kept writing. By morning, she had written her first original composition. Over the following weeks, she wrote more. She couldn't play, so she composed. She poured everything she was feeling into those pages. The fear, the anger, the grief, the tiny sparks of hope that she tried to ignore but couldn't completely put out. She wrote music about what it felt like to lose the thing you loved most. She wrote music about silence and sound and everything in between. 4 months after the accident, her doctor cleared her to start using her left hand again. The physical therapy had worked better than expected. She still didn't have full strength, and some movements were harder than before. But she could play. Not like she used to, but she could play. The first time she sat at the piano, she didn't play any of the classical pieces she had memorized. She played her own composition, the one she had written that sleepless night when everything felt hopeless. Her mother stood in the doorway and listened. When the last note faded, she had tears streaming down her face. She walked over and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "That," she whispered, "was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." For the first time since the accident, she smiled. She finally understood what the professor had meant. She had found the heart behind the notes. It had taken losing everything to discover what truly mattered. And now she was ready to show the world. She spent the rest of her senior year rebuilding. Her left hand was weaker than before, and some days the frustration made her want to scream. Passages that used to flow easily now required intense concentration. Her fingers would cramp up after long practice sessions. There were moments when she wondered if she was fooling herself, if she should just accept that her dream was over and move on with her life. But she kept going. Every single day, she sat at that piano and worked through the pain. She did her hand exercises. She practiced scales until her muscles ached. She learned to adapt, to find new ways of playing that worked with her limitations instead of against them. And through it all, she kept composing. The music that came out of her now was different from anything she had created before. It was raw and honest and full of everything she had been through. Her teacher noticed the change immediately. The girl who used to play like a machine was gone. In her place was someone who played with her whole heart. Every note meant something. Every phrase told a story. It was like watching a caterpillar become a butterfly. As graduation approached, her teacher sat her down for a serious conversation. She asked about her plans for the future. College? Work? What did she want to do with her life? She knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted to study music at a real conservatory. She wanted to become a professional pianist. She wanted to prove that everything she had been through meant something. Her teacher smiled and pulled out a brochure. It was for Thornwood Conservatory in Boston, one of the most prestigious music schools in the entire country. Students came from all over the world to study there. The competition was fierce. Only the most talented musicians were accepted. "I think you should apply," her teacher said. She stared at the brochure with a mix of hope and terror. Thornwood was a dream school, the kind of place she had never allowed herself to seriously consider. She was a deaf girl from a small town in Oregon. She had a damaged left hand. What chance did she have against students who had been training at elite academies their whole lives? But her teacher believed in her. And after everything she had survived, she wasn't about to let fear stop her now. The application process took months. She had to submit recordings of her performances, including at least one original composition. She wrote essays about her background, her challenges, her goals. She gathered recommendation letters from every music teacher she had ever worked with. She poured her heart into every word, every note, every page. Then came the waiting. Weeks passed with no response. She checked the mail every day, her stomach tight with anxiety. She tried to prepare herself for rejection. Most applicants didn't get in. There was no shame in trying and failing. At least that's what she told herself. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely open the envelope. Her mother stood beside her, holding her breath. The first word she saw was, "Congratulations." She had been selected for an in-person audition. Not accepted yet, but one step closer. Only a small percentage of applicants made it this far. She would have to travel to Boston and perform in front of the admissions committee. If they liked what they saw, she would be offered a spot. Her mother burst into tears of joy. They hugged each other in the kitchen, laughing and crying at the same time. It wasn't a guarantee of anything, but it was a chance. After everything she had been through, she had earned a chance. The audition was scheduled for early April. She had 5 weeks to prepare. She practiced harder than she ever had in her life. She worked on her classical pieces until they were flawless. She refined her original composition, the one she had written during her darkest days after the accident. She visualized the audition room, imagined herself sitting at a grand piano, pictured the judges watching her with neutral expressions. The night before she left for Boston, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed running through every possible scenario. What if she froze up? What if her hand cramped during the performance? What if they took one look at her and decided she didn't belong there? Her mother came into her room and sat on the edge of her bed. She didn't say anything at first. She just held her daughter's hand in the darkness. "I'm scared," she admitted. It was the first time she had said it out loud. Her mother squeezed her hand. "Being scared means you care. It means this matters to you. But remember something. You've already done the impossible. You learned to play piano without being able to hear. You came back from an injury that should have ended your career. Whatever happens tomorrow, nothing can take that away from you." She nodded, feeling some of the tension leave her body. Her mother was right. She had already proven herself. This audition was just another chance to show who she really was. The next morning, they flew to Boston. The conservatory was even more impressive than the pictures had shown. Grand old buildings with tall windows. Concert halls with perfect acoustics. Students walking around carrying instrument cases, their faces serious and focused. This was a place where dreams came true. But it was also a place where dreams were crushed. She found the audition room and waited in the hallway with other candidates. Everyone looked nervous. A few were pacing back and forth. Others sat perfectly still with their eyes closed, probably running through their pieces in their heads. She noticed some of them glancing at her, curious about the girl who wasn't wearing hearing aids, who moved her hands in strange stretching exercises, who seemed somehow different from the rest of them. That's when she heard them talking. 2 men in suits were standing near a doorway, not realizing she could see their reflections in a window. She couldn't hear their words, but she could read their lips. She had been reading lips her entire life. "The deaf girl?" one of them said. "Honestly, I don't know why we invited her. This feels like a waste of time." The other man shrugged. "Probably just for publicity. Makes us look inclusive. But there's no way she can compete at this level." Her heart sank. All her confidence, all the encouragement from her mother and her teacher, all the hours of preparation. None of it mattered to these people. They had already decided she couldn't do it. They had already written her off. She felt tears burning in her eyes. Part of her wanted to run, to get on the next flight home and forget this whole thing. Why put herself through the humiliation of performing for people who had already made up their minds? But then she thought about her journey, the thunderstorm, when she was 7 years old, the vibrations of that old piano traveling through her small body, the years of practicing while other kids laughed at her, the accident that nearly took everything, the music she had written from the depths of her pain. She hadn't come this far to quit now. She wiped her eyes, straightened her back, and walked toward the audition room. When they called her name, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. 12 judges sat behind a long table, their faces impossible to read. A beautiful grand piano stood in the center of the room, gleaming under the lights. She introduced herself simply. She explained that she was deaf and would be performing a classical piece followed by an original composition. She saw some of the judges exchange glances. Doubt, skepticism, maybe even pity. She walked to the piano and sat down on the bench. She removed her shoes, a habit she had developed years ago. The judges looked confused, but she didn't explain. She didn't owe them an explanation. She placed her bare feet flat on the floor. She rested her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first note rang out into the silent room. She felt it travel through her fingertips, up through her arms, and deep into her chest. The vibrations spread through the floor beneath her bare feet. She couldn't hear the sound the way the judges could, but she felt it in every part of her body. And that was enough. That had always been enough. She started with the classical piece, a complex sonata that demanded technical precision and emotional depth. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence, finding each note exactly where it needed to be. Her left hand, the one doctors had said might never fully recover, kept pace with her right. The months of painful rehabilitation, the endless exercises, the tears of frustration, all of it had led to this moment. She didn't think about the judges watching her. She didn't think about the men who had dismissed her in the hallway. She thought only about the music. She let it flow through her like water, like breath, like something that had always been part of her. When the sonata ended, she paused for just a moment. She kept her eyes closed, gathering herself for what came next. This was the piece that mattered most, the composition she had written during the darkest period of her life. The music that had saved her when she thought everything was lost. She called it Sound Without Sound. It began quietly, soft notes that seemed to float in the air like dust particles in sunlight. The melody was simple at first, almost childlike. It was the sound of a little girl pressing piano keys for the first time, discovering a world she didn't know existed. Then, it grew more complex. Layers built upon layers. The music became heavier, darker. It told the story of struggle, of being different in a world that didn't understand, of reaching for something that everyone said was impossible. Then came the crash, a sudden burst of dissonant chords that shattered the melody. Everything fell apart. The music became chaotic, painful, lost. This was the accident, the hospital, the broken hand and the broken dreams. This was lying in bed, wondering if life was worth living anymore. But slowly, something new emerged from the wreckage. A single note, repeated over and over, quiet but persistent. It refused to disappear. And around that note, a new melody began to form, different from before. Scarred, but beautiful, stronger for having been broken. The piece built toward its climax. Her hands flew across the keys, her whole body moving with the music. She wasn't just playing anymore. She was telling her story. Every moment of pain, every triumph, every tear, every smile. It was all there in the notes. The final passage was unlike anything she had written before. It was hopeful but honest. It didn't pretend that everything was perfect. It acknowledged the scars while celebrating the survival. It said that being broken wasn't the end. Sometimes, it was just the beginning. The last note hung in the air for a long moment. Then, silence. She opened her eyes. The judges sat frozen behind their table. No one moved. No one spoke. She couldn't read their expressions. For a terrible moment, she thought she had failed. Maybe the music that meant so much to her hadn't translated. Maybe they had heard nothing but noise. Then one judge stood up. An older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She began to clap. Slowly at first, then faster. Another judge joined her. Then another. Within seconds, all 12 judges were on their feet, applauding. She sat at the piano, unable to process what was happening. She could feel the vibrations of their clapping through the floor. She could see tears on some of their faces. The same people who had looked at her with doubt and skepticism just minutes ago were now giving her a standing ovation. One of the judges, the woman with silver hair, walked over to her. She spoke slowly and clearly, so she could read her lips. That was one of the most extraordinary performances I have ever witnessed in 30 years of teaching music. You didn't just play. You made us feel something. That's the rarest gift a musician can have. 3 weeks later, she received the official letter. Not only had she been accepted to Thornwood Conservatory, but she had been awarded a full scholarship. The admissions committee had been unanimous in their decision. They wanted her. She held the letter in her hands and cried. All those years of being told she couldn't do it. All those people who had laughed at her, doubted her, written her off. She had proven every single one of them wrong. Her 4 years at Thornwood were transformative. She studied with some of the best musicians in the world. She performed in concert halls she had only ever seen in photographs. She composed dozens of new pieces, each one drawing from her unique experience of feeling music instead of hearing it. Her senior recital sold out within hours, with people traveling from across the country to see the deaf pianist who played with her soul. After graduation, her career took flight. She performed at Carnegie Hall in New York. She played at the Sydney Opera House in Australia. She toured concert venues across Europe and Asia. Critics ran out of words to describe her. They called her a miracle, a genius, a once-in-a-generation talent. But she never let the praise go to her head. She remembered where she came from. She remembered the little girl pressing piano keys during a thunderstorm, feeling vibrations she couldn't name. She used her success to help others. She started a foundation to provide music education to deaf and hard-of-hearing children around the world. She developed new teaching methods based on her own experience, showing young people that they didn't need to hear music to play it. She visited schools and hospitals and community centers, sharing her story with anyone who would listen. In every interview, they asked her the same question. How did she do it? How did she become a world-class pianist without being able to hear? Her answer was always the same. People think music is about sound, she would say. But they're wrong. Music is about connection. It's about taking what's inside you and sharing it with others. You don't need ears for that. You just need heart. At 32 years old, she stood on a stage at the Global Music Awards, receiving the Lifetime Achievement Honor. She was the youngest person ever to receive it. The audience was filled with the biggest names in the music industry, people she had admired her entire life. But as she looked out at the crowd, her eyes found only two faces. Her mother sat in the front row, older now but still beautiful, tears streaming down her cheeks. Next to her was Mrs. Patterson, her first piano teacher. The woman who had taken a chance on a deaf 7-year-old when no one else would. Her hands were twisted with arthritis, but she clapped harder than anyone in the room. She couldn't hear the applause, but she could feel it. It vibrated through the stage, through her feet, through her entire body. It felt like thunder, like that first thunderstorm so many years ago, the one that had changed everything. She stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the audience. Thousands of eyes looking back at her, waiting. When I was a little girl, she began. People told me I would never play music. They said it was impossible. They said I was wasting my time. They thought I couldn't do it. She paused and smiled. They were wrong. The audience erupted. The applause was deafening, though she couldn't hear it. But she felt it in her bones. She felt it in her heart. She felt it in every part of who she was. She had started with nothing but a dream and a pair of hands on an old piano. She had faced doubt, cruelty, injury, and despair. But she had never stopped playing. She had never stopped believing. And in the end, her music had spoken louder than any words ever could.